Hello and welcome to Let's Get This Skinny. I'm so excited because today we have on the show my very good friend, Franziska Freitag, who I always just call Franzi. So that was a little bit traumatizing for me to say your whole name. Franzi, I'm so excited to chat with you today. You have been a friend of mine for years, a friend, sort of a coach, a guide, a mentor. Franzi is originally from Germany. We met in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. And Franzi helps women break free from their inner prisons to experience more pleasure, fulfillment, and freedom in all areas of life. I will not list. Sorry. I will not list all of her certifications, but Franzi is she's NLP certified. I know that I've seen her in action. We ran a coaching program together years ago, and so I can really vet Franzi for when she says that she wants to see more women liberated and self-expressed, both in bed and in business. She truly means business. So, Franzi, I want to sort of start by talking about feminine energy because I feel like you were really at the forefront of this before it became cool. So, how do you define stepping into our divine feminine as women of today, and why does it matter?
Oh my God, thank you so much. I feel like this is the most beautiful compliment I've ever received. That's a really amazing question. I could talk a lot about it, but for me, just the comparison always what helps me to understand, what something means and is. And like I grew up, in a family with many men being entrepreneurs, being very successful. I studied business, it was all very masculine oriented, and it never quite clicked for me when I started my own business. So for me, the feminine part is actually just all the stuff that always felt very natural to me, but I learned not to do it because that's not how we do it. Right. So over the years of running I started my first business at 24, and having studied in such a male dominated world and university, I really taught myself, to have the courage to trust my inner needs and what feels good to me when it comes to business. And so the feminine side is really obviously bringing into balance our masculine and feminine side. Like we see many women that want to be entrepreneurs and they're just like flowing. Oh, I don't feel like it today. Yes, that's feminine, but if you want to run a successful business, like that's not going to help. You need both sides. So the feminine side is the one that's intuitive, right? That gets inspired. That's like, oh, I feel like I want to talk about that. Oh, I want to, sell this. I want to create that. It's like a feminine entrepreneur is very connected, deeply connected with her creativity and intuition. And then the healthy side to it is the masculine side that takes action, right? Because that was like my first step when I first started. Like, oh, I'm just going to be my feminine. I'm just going to be receiving. It worked. Like, don't get me wrong. There was clients and money coming in, but I was like, wait, like, why is it not happening to the extent that I want to? And that's when this masculine part clicked to me. I was like, okay, well, I guess I have to take action as well. I guess I have to sell. I guess I have to put myself out there, and do these things that are also really important. And when we bring these two sides that we all carry, no matter man or woman or whatever you identify as within, then I believe we can have this massive success in business. But the feminine side, yeah, it's the creative, it's the intuitive, it's the soft, but yet fierce and firm, depending on also where we're at in our cycle, right? That's another topic we can talk about. And just allowing all these different aspects that we carry as, women to be expressed in whatever way feels good. And that's very different to the masculine side of things because they are more balanced, in their expression.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when you mentioned about the feminine side of the creativity and the kind of like having the spur of the moment thoughts and kind of going with it, I feel like those are the elements that a lot of us, we, at least for myself, we sort of feel shame for taking those kinds of actions. I always really reward myself when I'm doing my business and kind of the more masculine ways, like, oh yeah, I got that done. Like I did the sales page or whatever it is. And when I do kind of follow my intuition or creativity as it relates to business, I can sometimes even feel guilt or shame for that. How do you kind of figure out the balance? Do you specifically sync it to your cycle? Do you make it very clear, like, okay, I'm going to do a feminine task right now, and then a masculine? Like, how do you ride that balance?
I think I'm definitely way more on the feminine side of things. It's definitely my business is very aligned to my cycle. You know, that took me quite some years to understand that I have different levels of energy at different moments of my cycle, which also no one teaches us, right? It's like, oh, I'm tired. I should be doing more. Like, why am I feeling I just want to hide under my blanket? You know, it's like, well, your hormones are changing. Surprise, you know, you're meant to feel different. So that's the first huge aspect as a woman. You know, no matter if we work in corporate or if we have a service-based business or we're selling products, it doesn't matter. Just to get to know yourself better. So for me, it's like, you know, I know the week, or not the week, but maybe the 3 days before I start my new cycle, I start my moon, is like I'm not going to do anything, and I'm allowing myself to deeply rest because I know this recharge will get me through the next cycle with so much more energy rather than if I push through. When I'm heading towards ovulation, I'm like, that's the moment to get shit done, to launch, you know, to sell, because my energy is just like through the roof. And, you know, that's a whole other conversation where we can talk about sexual energy and how this, you know, multiplies when we use it in our creativity and towards our business and selling and whatnot. You know, it's all the same energy. We don't just have to use it in the bedroom. We can use it in our business and, you know, benefit from that as well. So this is my nature, you know, this is my everyday life. Like I don't, that's organic, natural to me. I don't think about that anymore. But then, you know, what I also really contemplated about a lot is like this masculine side that we call, right? Which is like the taking action, creating sales pages. It's like, yes, and there's so much more to it, because I believe if my feminine side is truly deeply connected to my why, which is the connection with intuition, spirit, creativity, you know, and the expression of it, then the masculine inside of me, like, I just want to take action. I just want to share this with the world because I'm like so in love and aroused and turned on by the work I'm sharing with the world, you know, so that I don't even have to ask myself anymore, like, which side is doing what. It's just they're married, they're like loving each other, you know, they're like happy.
Yeah. And that's something I definitely want to get into, this intersection of like sex, pleasure, business. But before we go into that, because I definitely do, how did you start learning about how to sync your cycles, like understanding the female hormonal cycle more? Because I think that's a really, you know,
Yeah.
forefront topic right now. And as you say, we don't all we haven't, a lot of us haven't learned it in the conventional forms. How did you go about learning it? I'm wondering if you could share some
Yeah.
resources for those.
That's a good question. It's just, it took years because, you know, now there's amazing like people, mentors, coaches up there online that teach all that stuff. But like that to me started maybe 3, 4 years ago. And I had no freaking clue, you know, until I realized, oh, wait a moment, this is what happened. So it was just really my awareness that eventually, you know, created this understanding of like, wait, like I have had my period now, what, like 20 years? Not that long at this point, but you know, quite a while. Like it took me until now to understand this is impacting my, it's crazy to me. You know, how can we live in a society, in a world where women don't learn that stuff in school? You know, and we have to, like, now, you know, we don't have to teach ourselves anymore because there's people doing it. But it just, I just became aware of it. I don't know how. I really can't answer that question, but I just started to see the pattern. You know what? I do know. So I used to have really painful periods for a while, and also very like hormonal imbalances. And eventually, you know, once a month, I would realize I would go into like 2, 3 days of deep depression. Like the world is ending. Like everything is against me. Like I'm dying, you know, and I would call my mom and I'm like, oh, I'm like the world. And she's like, are you getting a period? And I'd be like, good point. Yes. She's like, call me after your period. You know? And so, and that would happen, I don't know, a few times, a few months, right? Until I was like, oh, hold on a moment. If this is impacting my mood, you know, maybe the other parts of my cycle are impacting as well. So that's actually the answer to your question. From a deep pain, you know, eventually I realized, okay, wait, this is impacting, you know, how I'm feeling. And so I might as well use it.
And I love that advice because we can read the books and we can, you know, consume all the content around this stuff. And for me, sometimes it's almost overwhelming because then I'm so focused on like, okay, well, which particular day I'm at day, you know, 19, where should I be in the cycle? And ultimately, I think everyone's is a little bit different. So I love that approach of just like, well, figuring out, you know,
Listen,
when are your highs, when are your lows, and then tracking it from, you know, an intuitive place. So let's talk about the intersection of pleasure and business success. This is something that I first heard actually years ago from, she's actually also in Mexico, but I don't think you know her. And she was saying how she was like, you know what, when I'm having really good sex, I'm making a lot of money. And like, I actually feel like that is like, that's the key. And so she would always focus on the sex part. But I'm curious to know, because you're really stepping more into this angle too. How did you figure that out for yourself? And what is your take on that?
Well, I really, always was a big believer of life force energy impacting our whole life and business as well, right? And then this whole sexual journey, I just never talked about it, but using it and using our like life force, sexual energy, and orgasms to manifest and create and co-create, whether that's us by ourselves or with another person, like it doesn't matter. We can utilize that energy all day, every day. But it's really just been, I don't know, I think the last year that I've been diving deeper into talking more about it and using pleasure also as a way of healing, and I don't know, maybe, when we do, all these personal branding workshops, all the, business masterminds, everything that I learned is like, well, what's really natural and easy to you, that's eventually, what you can teach and what's going to be really easy for you. And since I started my first business, so that's like 10 years ago, I was like, I should just talk about sex. Like that's always been on the top of my head. I should just talk about sex and pleasure because this department of my life has always been hence like the easiest aspect for me. I think I've been raised, with a very open mother. I always was very deeply connected to my sexuality, to my pleasure and the expression of myself through sexuality as well, and curious and courageous and experimental. And so that part to me always was thriving. I just never talked about it. And so eventually, since, the last 12 months have been the biggest catalyst and change in my life, I was like, well, I do believe also our purpose is deeply connected with talking about the things that scare us the most. And I was like, I don't want to talk about this. And I'm like, fuck it. I talk about it all the time with all my friends nonstop. It's like, the biggest part of my passion that I burn for, I might as well shift my work into it and pivot, into a whole different aspect to it. And as much as I love business and entrepreneurship and supporting women and their purpose and whatnot, I'm like, well, if that part doesn't click, you're going to be really struggling in your business and with money because that's all the lower energy center energy, right? That's grounding, that's making us feel safe and expressive. And we need that in order to be thriving in business. So I'm like, all right, well, gotta do what you gotta do.
And does your protocol or guidance really differ? I don't know if we need to split this up into like when we're talking to the single people and then when we're talking to the women in partnership, right? Because I think just hearing that, I'm already like, ooh, okay, well, how do I advance my sexual pleasure? Even if it's simply for the sake of, success and money and obviously also pleasure. But does it make more sense to kind of talk about it separately for those who are in partnership versus those who aren't?
I
Or
think so because like sexuality and sensuality and spirituality in partnership needs a lot more than us being by ourselves. When you're with two people, no matter the constellation of it, you need like we got to talk about consent, like safety, communication, like all that kind of stuff that's really setting up the foundation for a really beautiful connection for them to explore the higher realms of it. Whereas when I'm with myself, all of that is a little bit easier, even though the safety part I think is always the most important one, where it's like, am I actually feeling safe within myself? And if I like, that's the foundation. And then that I can bring into my relationship with another person. I can't expect that relationship to be safe if I'm not safe within myself first. So it's interconnected, but also definitely separate, I would say.
and so how do we get to feel safe within ourselves and how do we know if we really do? Because when you say that, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm safe with myself. But what does that really mean and how can we
Yeah,
take steps
that's like I think the most important question because everything builds on that. If we talk money, sex, business, it doesn't matter. It all starts with the safety within ourselves, and so that's where we got to look at trauma. Like where am I holding trauma within myself that's ready for healing? Making sure it's like looking after the inner child of myself, right? Looking after all different parts that I carry, and that's like millions of them. And that can many times mean speaking my boundaries, like working on my self worth to figure out what I'm deserving of in being treated, and stepping up for myself and speaking my truth. Like that part is very deeply connected. So when we talk about safety, it's not necessarily all the beautiful stuff. It's actually all the stuff that makes us feel uncomfortable, and communicating that with ourselves, the people around us, our clients, our lovers, our partners, our family, very important, so that's one big part, is like boundaries, standards, communication, and speaking up for myself and the needs I have, despite the fears of, oh my God, but what if I won't be loved if I speak my truth? What if, I won't belong anymore? Like all those deep core fears that we all have, like that's what I got to address to be really safe in myself. And then I have to look at my belief systems around life, for example. Am I believing life and the universe too, or God, or whatever word you use, is supporting me, or is it against me? Can I really deeply have my nervous system relax because I feel so provided for? Or is there still scarcity, that something bad is going to happen, that something is not going to work out? Like all these beliefs and mindset and, programations of our nervous systems, they play a big part and role of our feeling of safety within as well. And then you can extend that if you're, into men, and you're like, well, am I feeling safe with man? Or is there some unhealthy belief systems around the fear of being, I don't know, betrayed, abused, like being lied to, whatever, we've been programmed to believe about man as woman, which is very toxic, honestly, and very sad. Then that's the kind of work I got to do as well. So, safety comes from many different aspects in life, that if I really deeply want to feel safe within myself, it takes a certain amount of work, if that's nothing I've naturally been growing up to learn in the family, that raised me.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because that reminds me of a really deep conversation that we had. I remember in my house in San Miguel, and it was before I kind of manifested a partner who is now no longer my partner. But I really think that you did help me manifest that, because I remember you asking me, well, how would you feel if, because I was, to give a little bit of context, you helped me uncover that for me, in terms of those toxic beliefs, I sort of felt like, oh, I have to present it
Mhm.
for men. I have to be a certain thing for men, and I have to look a certain way. And that's incredibly draining. And I remember you asking me, like, how would it feel if you just were with someone that just loved you for exactly who you were, and you didn't have to present and perform. And honestly, meditating on that, I feel like completely changed the trajectory of my life in partnership. It just became so much easier. And so I think you're so right. It is about figuring out what are the beliefs that you're thinking about, whether it's sex or the opposite sex, or the same sex, if that's what you're into. You know what I mean? It's like it's getting clear on those thoughts. What is there, like a particular ritual, a daily practice, or something that we can do if we really want to harness kind of getting more in touch with ourselves, our boundaries, our feeling of safety? Is there like a practical, whether it's like a journaling prompt, or I don't know, a breath practice, it's something that we can actually do to kind of practice?
I mean, there's so much you can do. It depends on how much time you're having. I think deep listening, just I think that's the first thing I teach all my clients, no matter man or woman, it doesn't matter. The listening to when your body goes like, oh, and it constricts, or when your body's like, and you relax and you open and you start listening. When you feel that way with people, when you feel that way with money, when you feel that way with selling, when you feel that way with showing up your face online. And that's how you get to know yourself better. And then from there, like I always tell my clients, it's like you becoming, I think I told you the same thing, like you becoming your own inner detective. You got to become so curious about yourself, as in like, why am I being the way I am? Where does this come from? Why, like, question everything. And so this deep listening, I really find, is the first amazing connection to make with oneself, to learn more of who I am and why I am the way I am, and then not judge that, but love that and be like, oh, right, like this is like I feel constricted here, I feel pain, I feel fear, and you know what? Now because I'm becoming aware of it, I can love that part. I don't have to judge myself for it. I can just give this part love because that's all it needs, and then it will be safer. Here we are to express more of it.
Yeah. Um, Possibly switching gears a little bit, I'm going to ask you a possibly dumb question because I feel like everyone knows this topic except for me, and I see it on TikTok all the time. But it's this the dark feminine. I still don't even know what people are talking about. I apologize to those listening that are like Kiki, get caught up. But what is it, and what are your thoughts about it from a practical
Yes.
standpoint?
Oh my God, favorite topic in the whole world. So funnily enough, now there is a title for it. You know, I'm like, oh, glad. Like now I can use this word because I know that part within myself. I was deeply connected in my 20s. I was like living it to the fullest, you know, but back then there was no word for it. And I'm like, what am I doing? Is this like, anyway, so the dark feminine is kind of like an archetype, I would say, that comes from the understanding that, right, there is the divine feminine, which is like all that we are as feminine beings, that men carry within themselves too, but women are just like, you know, the representation of that. And like everything in this world, there is two sides of it, right? And we have experienced like the motherly, nurturing, caring, loving, beautiful, light filled side of it. And then the opposite of it is the dark feminine. Now, for me, and obviously I can only, you know, talk about my own definition and understanding of it. There's books and books and books about it, and they might tell different stories. For me, the dark feminine is the permission to embrace my deepest, darkest desires that I have shamed away, that I felt guilty about, that I put in the boxes, buried in the back of my head, about my sexual desires, about my financial desires, about my expressive desires, like anything I deep down want to be and like share and bring into the world, but I feel ashamed of. That's for me the dark feminine. And many times, obviously, it's connected to sexuality and money and these kind of like darker, you know, needs that we have that as women, we don't really allow ourselves to embrace. As a man, they are way more connected to that, you know, it's like this dominant side. But for us women, it's like, wait, I get to be that too. It's like, fuck yeah. You know, that's where your pleasure is hidden. That's where your full body orgasm will have that source, you know, connected to like these deep down, buried, dark needs that we have, but never learn to allow ours, not just to allow and admit, but to embrace and to celebrate. And once we're connected to this deep source of energy, you will have so much more energy available to you as a woman because guess how much it takes to suppress unconsciously, right? All these like deep needs that we have because we never learned that they're okay to be there. And that's the
Yeah.
deep work I love doing with women because that's when we get to the truth of who we are being at our core and essence as a human being, as a soul, as a woman in this world. And only if I allow myself to dig out, you know, that kind of stuff and be like, this is me too. Oh my God, you know, like, let's go. That's when I piece myself back together and I integrate those parts that it takes so much energy to suppress. And I can actually talk about women empowerment because without that, you know, I'm only half of the medal. Like there is a big piece missing. And that again has to do a lot with like boundaries and standards and speaking truth and whatnot. But then we get into the really juicy stuff, which is pleasure and sexuality and embracing these, you know, needs and desires and ideas and fantasies that we might have. But like, no, a decent woman wouldn't do that. You know, like
Yeah.
I can't, like, not possible. It's like, yes, all of it, please, and more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, what would be the practical like step in figuring that out? Is it just sitting alone with a notebook and being like, "Okay, what are my deep dark fantasies?" and getting clear on that, or
I think that's a great first step. Obviously, you know, join my classes and courses because that's the juicy stuff we talk about. But yeah, like the first thing I teach women is to create a safe space for themselves, you know, which is like more than lighting a candle. It's a little more energetic than that. But once you've learned to create this safe space for you, then it's exactly what you're saying. Just sit in it naked, you know, get to know your body, just look at your body, just like so big for so many women. They like, I've never looked at myself naked, you know, and all the different parts that I carry. I'm like, okay, well, let's start here. And um, and then let your mind wander into the land of fantasies, you know, and whether that's towards the topic of sexuality or business or money. And whenever you notice your mind would turn a corner or like be like, oh no, this is exactly where you want to go. And I know, you know, we all have this mechanism in our mind. I know we do because I talk to a lot of women and they all say the same thing. I'm like, it's not just me. You know, if I have it, I know you have it too. So let your mind wander, let your womb lead the way. And then there's a lot of womb work we can do, connecting with our womb as well, right? And that doesn't mean you got to get the crystal wands and the yoni eggs and step by step, let's take it slow. But you can just place your hand on your womb and start to build this relationship as well and be like, hi, I'm sorry, I never talked to you probably for the entirety of my life, but what do you actually need? What do you desire? How do you feel most alive and expressed in this world? So yeah, these two aspects I think are a really good start as well.
I love that. And actually, it segues into two things. One is definitely want to hear about where women can learn more about your offerings, because I know that they are so special. And I want to bring up that it actually relates to some of the work that I do around food, in that for me, I lost my period for quite a while. First, I think it was because I was restricting and barely eating, but then I was not, necessarily super thin, and I still didn't have my period. And I remember my coach said to me, "Well, you're not being a woman, so how can you let like, how do you expect to flow?" And I think it was really that, and I really that's why I really admire the work that you're doing. I don't think that it's just, oh, balance your hormones or eat enough or whatever it is. If you are acting with really betraying that feminine side of you, and I think as you brought to light also the dark feminine side of you, and if you are ignoring that and suppressing that and spending so much energy rejecting that in a sense, then you're also not going to have regular nice periods. Just like as a very specific example, right? And I definitely didn't. So yeah, it's really important. And before we kind of close up and share where women can join your workshop and follow you, I do want to talk about your relationship to food, because Franzi, I was telling, is the OG skinny bitch. I remember in San Miguel, we'd go for brunch all the time, because that's what we do in San Miguel. No one works, we just brunch all the time. And Franzi always orders the most delicious thing with, more cheese, please. Yes, please. And Franzi is truly she has a gorgeous body. So Franzi, can you talk a little bit about why you think you've been able to have such a kind of what seems like a very effortless relationship with food, and you seem to really master what most men have naturally, which is like, I'm not going to be fat. Like, no, why would I be fat? Right? That's so weird, right? And so what do you think it just comes natural to you in terms of the
I mean, and now it does for sure. Now it's like I have the most healthy relationship with food that I've ever had in my life. I do believe in genetics to a
yes,
certain
of course.
degree for sure, and I'm very blessed in that regard. Like when you look at the side of my dad, they're all like tall and skinny. So that's like there. I'm not going to deny that. But besides that, I didn't always have a healthy, like not at all healthy relationship with food, especially as a teenager. Like only now in my mid 30s, I'm starting to realize how massive of an impact, movies and magazines had on my understanding of attraction towards my body. And I'm like, you fuckers, you lied to me. If like, oh my God, I could have saved so much hardship if I hadn't listened to the bullshit. Like remember these hip low jeans, and then all the models would have like skinny like hips, and I always had fat over these jeans, and I thought it's like not normal. I was thought there's something wrong with me. So that's as unhealthy, like, and deeper than that it was. And then I learned through doing a decent amount of plant medicine, without even having any intentions of like I want to lose this, like, what do you call them in English, the hip things, the
Oh, the muffin tops?
yes.
Is that what?
Exactly. So I always had them, and I always had a bit of a belly. um, and it bothered me because of all this fucking programming that we get through media. And then eventually in some of these ceremonies that I did, I learned what emotions I'm holding within these areas of my body. And I can't tell you anymore, to be honest, what it was about, but it all had to do with self-worth, with self-love, what I'm believing about myself. And I guess after I cleared that and healed that in these ceremonies, I never ever had this little extra fat. And don't get me wrong, it was still like fine, just
Yeah.
in my head was like, I want to, don't have that. And it never came back. So I do believe, really working on our emotional liberation and healing is the biggest and easiest way to have a healthy relationship with food and your body and be, skinny or whatever that looks like for you. So answering your question, definitely genetics, very blessed, but also just emotional healing, trauma healing, and connecting with the energetic side of what we are protecting ourselves from. Right, most of the time, weight is a protection mechanism. Um, so
So good. You nailed it. And you know what? You really touched on a key point that I don't know if I do a good enough job of emphasizing, but when I say skinny bitch, it's that. It's like even though other people would have thought that, it's like, "Oh, what are you talking about? You're skinny, right?" But there was something for you that was like, "No, there's this," right? And it was this emotional thing that you needed to release, right? And so it's not that skinny equals a certain shape or size or form because we all come in different shapes and sizes, right? But it's that release of like you becoming you, skinny for you, and then that could be a size 2 or it could be a size 12, and so it really is a feeling. So thank you for that, and I know that everyone listening just wants to stalk the hell out of you and join all the things that you're doing. So you have the floor.
oh my God, yes, please do all come and join. I think the more the merrier. I do like believe in energy amplification, where it's like the more people in the room, the more enhanced the energy get, the bigger the outcome and the experience, if that's, in a workshop rather than one-on-one. But I do have this incredible online workshop. It's not an online masterclass, it's an online workshop coming up. Is launching now and it's going to be happening in 2 weeks. It's called Pleasure to Wealth. So it's like all the juicy, forbidden, apple fruit kind of conversations that we'll be having. But, rather than it just being a masterclass, we're actually going to do the work. So it's a workshop where we'll be using NLP work as well as like family constellation work to work on all the things money and wealth and the expansion of that while looking at our pleasure, the dark feminine, what are we suppressing, what are we not admitting ourselves to have in these two areas because they are so deeply connected and intertwined. And, we can only thrive if we thrive in both. So that's a big piece. And the last piece of it is this whole identity work. Like the NLP and the constellation work really helps us to rewire our brain chemistry so that immediately after the workshop, you're going to feel very different about receiving, having, and growing money and sexuality and pleasure. But the identity work is the ongoing work to not just receive it, but to hold it and to grow it. So I'm bringing it I'm like, if you want to do one workshop in your life, that's probably it.
Amazing. And I'll link all of, I assume that that'll be
Yeah,
link in
yeah,
bio on your
yeah.
Instagram as well. Amazing. Thank you,
Thank you
Franzi. I love you
so
so much.
much. Thanks everyone for listening. Bye.